The way that works is you make an incision under the collar line, you insert a pump, that pump pumps formaldehyde around the body. Well, when you release the pump, you get back pressure and it spits this stuff out. And there have been loads of people that have had this in them. This is the kind of volume that you get come out, and this is in someone's carotid artery. It isn't natural. My name is John O'Looney. I'm a funeral director based in Milton Keynes. I've been a funeral director for 18 years. 10 of those was spent working with Cooperative Funeral Care, which is a major funeral provider in the UK. And the last 8 years, I've been running my own funeral home. There isn't much I haven't seen. In 7 years of that, I worked for the Coroner as well, so body recovery. So I'm quite familiar with the processes involved with the Coroner, and also recovering deceased in all shapes and states, and I've got a good idea of what is normal and what isn't. Back halfway through 2021, we had a 30-year-old man in who died suddenly. He was, shall we say, early 30s, and he had a big social circle, as you do at that age, and his family wanted us to embalm him to make him presentable for a large number of people who wanted to pay their respects in the Chapel of Rest. So he'd been for a post-mortem, and during the post-mortem process, they'd removed all his organs, taken blocks and slides and looked at those organs to try and ascertain the manner of his death, and then they put them back in. So when we embalm someone, we then have to take those organs out and manually target the compromised circulatory system. And when we did that, we noticed that his arteries were actually quite significantly blocked with obstructions. So we grabbed a pair of tweezers and pulled that obstruction out, and we pulled a clot out of his femoral artery the full length of his leg. It appeared to be a natural looking clot initially, except there were properties about it that weren't natural. So let me explain. A clot is very jelly-like. It breaks apart easily. You can wash it down the plug hole. This stuff is like calamari. It's very rubbery, very strong, and this virtually filled his arteries. There was no doubt in my mind why this young man had died. Obviously, this is a pathology inside people. Have I ever seen anything like this before? No, in honesty. And I don't expect to find it in 30-year-olds and 32-year-olds and 48-year-olds and 42-year-olds, and it's young people. I've also got a BIE, British Institute of Embalmers member. He's full-time, he works for me, he's done 22 years. He's never seen anything like it either, and he's horrified.
In the UK, funeral directors, along with the coroner, are considered the gatekeepers to the cemetery. It is the funeral director's responsibility to report any unusual findings in regards to the body of the deceased, and the coroner's responsibility to investigate what may have happened. This system has been in place in the UK for hundreds of years, and it is meant to provide reassurance that any suspected foul play will be investigated.
Imagine that I pick a deceased up from the hospital and I bring that deceased back to my funeral home, and I'm in the mortuary, and as I'm rolling this deceased over to dress them, I see a puncture wound or a knife hanging out of their back. I have an obligation to report those concerns for two reasons. One, I have a legal obligation to do that. Legally, I have to report it, and I report that to my local coroner. And then number two, I have a moral obligation as a decent human being. I've got concerns. So I contacted my local coroner and voiced these concerns. I did that via an email. They didn't respond to the email. I got a call from one of the girls in the office 4 or 5 days later, and she said she'd spoken to the pathologist. He was happy with everything that he'd found when he'd looked at this deceased, and that he didn't need any samples and I should get rid of them. And he then suggested that this rubber grows inside deceased post-mortem. So basically, when you die, rubber fills your arteries, which is fantasy. It's just pure fantasy, you know. And if it wasn't, I would have seen it in 18 years that I've been in the industry.
After the inadequate response from his local coroner, John decided to escalate the issue.
There is not one death, it's loads of deaths, and I didn't seem to be getting anywhere with the local coroner. And I have to maintain a working relationship with these people. What do I do? Do I start screaming liar down the phone? You can't. So I go to his boss, and that's the Chief Coroner of England. And I wrote to them voicing concerns, and I said, look, We're seeing an unprecedented number of young deaths coming through. They're not COVID. We're finding these unnatural clots. What is it? You know, what are you doing about it? And I didn't get a reply. So then 3 weeks later, I wrote again. And they basically said, we have to follow government policy. It's not for us to change government policy. So clearly, government policy is that they don't talk about it. I've got an embalmer who's done 22 years. He's BIE certified. His own BIE have threatened any embalmers from raising any concerns outside of the BIE. So they do a bi-monthly publication. It's a magazine, and it goes to all their members. And in that magazine, they openly warn them not to speak to anyone about any concerns they have, other than a girl called Karen Caney, who runs the organisation, this particular department. They're not allowed to speak out. They're not allowed to voice any concerns because they'll be seen as bringing the BI into disrepute. And therein lies the problem.
John says these white rubbery clots started to appear about 6 months after the first COVID-19 vaccines were administered in the UK.
So these are an illustration of the clots that we pulled out of a gentleman today. The longest one has come from the femoral artery. The two smallest ones have come from the radial artery. And you can see these are not natural. These have come from inside the arteries. These are not a natural thing. These shouldn't be inside this young man. These are sitting inside this guy's arteries. Is that normal? No, it isn't normal. It's not normal at all.
Now, I'm becoming convinced we're dealing with a completely new disease. Let me show you what I mean here. Now, these are the white clots, for want of a better term, that are being taken out by embalmers during post-mortem. They're white, sort of rubbery clots. And these are being washed out at post-mortem. And I'm just convinced of this now because I've seen so many pictures of these. And you can see here that they seem to be branching in exactly the same way that the vascular tree would branch, the light branches. So I think these are casts. And these are coming out from arteries in embalming, and they're coming out from veins in embalming as well. Now, in 2023, embalmers reported that 20% of corpses were showing these things. 20%, a fifth. This is just huge. Before 2020, the embalmers weren't seeing any.
The data presented by Dr. Campbell, estimating white clots to be present in 20% of deaths, is from a survey that was conducted by Major Tom Haviland, a data analyst and retired major in the US Air Force.
White fibrous clots that have been supplied by embalmers, and they're seeing these all around the world. Embalmers are seeing these clots, and they're seeing them actually in a high percentage of their corpses, unfortunately.
The appearance of these white clots coincides with an increase in the number of people dying and changes in the normal patterns of death.
We've no room at the inn. We're absolutely at capacity. Is that because I'm a good funeral director and people like what I do? Quite possibly. But I would suggest it's also because of the ONS figures, which tell us all there are over 100,000 sudden excess deaths in the last 12 months alone. The clue here is in the numbers. So to give you an idea, to put it into context, when I worked for the co-op, the branch I worked at was 800 funerals a year. And in that 800 funerals, I could count the amount of people under 50 on one hand in a 12-month period. I do that in a month here now, and I do 160 funerals a year. So the numbers are really, really off. We're getting people in their 40s, in their 30s, in their 50s, people that are dying suddenly with no comorbidities. The cancer story is a very interesting story. So prior to the COVID jab rollout, we used to get people come in that died from cancer, and they would have a cancer story. And that cancer story would be 2 years, 5 years, sometimes 10 years long. We're seeing people now that are dying within 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, and not in their 60s and 70s. These are people in their 40s, 30s, 50s, people that just don't die of cancer usually, in numbers that we're seeing.
Official data from all around the world does show that more people are dying since the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines.
Sudden death among healthy working-age people worldwide is skyrocketing. Here in America, it was up 40% during the third and fourth quarters of 2021.
It would appear we're still suffering from excess deaths of about 1,000 a week.
Add the two together, 2022 plus 2023, we get 101,903 excess deaths in the United Kingdom.
And I mean, I've seen the very raw figures, and they are quite worrying because there's excess deaths of the younger people going on. This excess death started and correlates with the vaccine programme.
The latest twist in this tragic saga is that the Office for National Statistics in the UK has suddenly decided to change the way that it calculates excess deaths.
Office for National Statistics in my country has changed the way that excess deaths are recorded. So we know there's been problems with excess deaths for some time.
Government agencies have just out of nowhere decided, you know, excess deaths? Yeah, we know excess deaths. Do you know excess deaths? Yeah, we're going to calculate them in a different way now. It's complicated statistics, information, numbers, maths. They're all very subjective concepts. This new way that you're going to calculate excess deaths, this is just a shot in the dark, which is what you've ironically been giving all of us. Is it going to make the number of excess deaths lower? Oh, yeah, it is. That's interesting.
Now, guess what? In the UK, they've come up with a new formula to count how many people are dying. And you'll be surprised to find out that now there are no excess deaths with this new formula.
For the last year, only one Member of Parliament in the UK has raised the issue.
After much pushback, he finally made it happen today in the House of Commons. Sadly, the chamber was almost empty with just a handful of MPs present.
Andrew Bridgen has been persecuted by other members of Parliament for daring to ask questions about COVID vaccines.
A tweet from the Chief Whip, Simon Hart, saying that they've removed the whip immediately from Conservative MP Andrew Bridgen. This relates to the fact that he has been sharing various information, questioning the safety of various COVID-related vaccines.
Andrew Bridgen is probably one of the only guys of any integrity. He stands up in Parliament on the back of 100,000 excess deaths, and they all jeer him. And they're all going on jollies in Davos instead of debating the death of their constituents, people that have actually voted him into that privileged position. It beggars belief. And it tells us all, doesn't it, that Westminster is rotten to its very core.
Mr. Bridgen has been relentless in his pursuit for the truth, and subsequent hearings have been much better attended.
Andrew Bridgen to move the motion. Andrew.
Thank you, Sir Gary.
On the 2nd of March 2024, 6 other members of Parliament jointly signed a letter with Mr. Bridgen, addressed to the government department responsible for statistics. The letter makes a formal request for granular data to be released about excess deaths and COVID-19 vaccines. There are reports that this data has already been made available to pharmaceutical companies, but not to the public. 21 members of Parliament have now given their support to this request and have urged the Health Secretary to release this data.
People are waking up. The Great Reset is very slowly morphing into the Great Awakening. And these people are running around like headless chickens now, desperate as people wake up to what's going on. This is a crime of biblical proportions. So I feel a mixture of grief and sadness at relationships that I've lost. But I feel very privileged because I feel this is a real pivotal time in humanity's history. And I feel very privileged to be a small cog in part of what hopefully will lead us to victory and the justice for these criminals. They can be taken to wherever that be, to Nuremberg or wherever. That's what that's my hope. I just can't be complicit in murder and killing people and not saying nothing. It's just not in me. How can you stand over the coffin of a 30-year-old man and watch his women and his missus and his kids crying their heart out, knowing what's happened and saying nothing? I can't do it. I can't do it. Not even once.